All right, looks like we got a pretty good group here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's joint EOL ACOM seminar. I'm Sarah Woods, and on behalf of EOL and ACOM, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. Mariama Dryák-Vallies. Mariama grew up on a farm in west central Wisconsin before heading east to earn her Bachelor's of Arts from Durham University in the UK in physical geography and archaeology. She then went on to obtain her master's in Earth and Climate Sciences from the University of Maine through her research related to Antarctic glaciology, climate, and ice-ocean interactions. Mariama now serves as the director for the Polar Science Early Career Community Office and co-PI for the ADVANCEing FieldSafety program, hosted by the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Environmental Sciences, Center for Education, Engagement, and Evaluation at the University of Colorado, Boulder. During graduate school, Mariama was actively involved in advocating for polar early career scientists as a board member and co-chair of the United States Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, US APEX, and as a project group member and national committee representative for APEX International. Mariama is passionate about working toward building accessible, welcoming, and safe Earth and polar science spaces for all, and strives to center that in all of the work that she does. On that note, please join me in welcoming Ms. Dryák-Vallies for her seminar titled Advancing Field Safety in the Geosciences and Beyond.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. And as she said, I'm Mariama Dryák-Vallies. My pronouns are she, her. And I am here representing a very large distributed team with the Advancing Field Safety program. We have folks in New Zealand, Switzerland, and all over the US. Our main hub, as noted, for the Advancing Field Safety program is at CIRES. And the Advancing Field Safety program, which I'll likely refer to as AFS for brevity, is funded by the National Science Foundation. So we're going to start out with interaction. If you all could pull out whatever device you have, and if you don't have a device, you can shout it out in a second. Can you tell me a few words that pop into your head when you hear the words field safety? You can access this at menti.com using the code at the top of the screen or with this QR code. And you can, I think it allows you to enter a few responses, so go for the first things that pop to mind. For those of you just joining, we're interacting with a Mentimeter. You can do that by visiting the code at the top. Okay, I'll wait a couple moments before pulling some out. Okay, really varied responses. We have mental health, psychological health. I'm seeing towers was one of the first things I saw. Cold, hot, interesting. Harassment. Field safe, personal safety. It sounds like a lot of like physical hazards related to things like heat, cold, heat stroke, frostbite. International cultures, proper gear, instrumentation, brief. Oh, that's cool. I'm wondering if that means briefing. Crime, PPE, gloves, harness. Yeah. Adequate time off, good sleep. This is really interesting. Animals and insects, personal safety, I think we did that one. Safety around equipment, weather extremes, cool. These are kind of all over the board. And one of the things, inclusion, welcoming, one of the things that I often hear in my world of glaciology and glacial research are people mentioning a lot of the physical hazards like cold, sunburn, things like avoiding crevasses. And we're seeing some of this here in like towers, thinking about like the physical safety parts of having good gear. But what often is left out of conversations is talking about the things beyond physical hazards. I'm just gonna set the stage by sharing a little bit from this research report from Clancy and others in 2014, where they surveyed over 600 folks going to the field and found that 64% of all survey respondents stated that they had experienced sexual harassment while doing field work in their workplace. 70% of women surveyed, 40% of men, and over 20% of respondents reported they had personally experienced sexual assault, with this breakdown here of 26% of women and 6% of men. So there are things that were popping up on the screen, like thinking about personal safety and creating a welcoming environment that we need to be paying attention to. So thanks for participating in that. Now we're gonna take a journey to Noatak National Preserve, to a field site I've worked in before. Apologies for the slightly grainy imagery. We're gonna pretend we're going to do field work at this specific field site, or that I'm doing this, rather. For those of you who aren't familiar with Noatak National Preserve, it's in the northwest bit of Alaska, very, very remote, and you can only get into the field sites I've worked at anyway, and in this case, this will be the case, with a plane. So it's very, like a small propeller plane, it's very remote. And I'm pretending that I am a postdoc who is going to the field here, and I'm very well trained in a particular method that we're employing. I'm just gonna leave it purposely vague. I'm an expert in this method. And I'm joining a small research team who's been to this field environment before, multiple times. This PI has been going there for like 20 years. I'm gonna try to use the laser pointer. Never mind. The PI on the right has been going to the field for 20 years, and this team has employed other methods, but not mine. So already we have this sort of power situation in a way, or complex power dynamics, which I'll call out in a second, because I'm this subject area expert in the method and joining the small team. So I guess I already started you off on some things that are relevant, but could you participate in this Menti exercise after I press play? What challenges come to mind that we might face when doing field work in this environment? So it'll be at the same link if you still have that up on your devices. Isolation, imposter syndrome, potential arguments. Isolation came up again. Yeah, I should have used a word cloud for this one. Power dynamics, right? What else? Oh, bummer that this is covering it up, but something about listening, potential disagreements between PI and postdoc on methods. Bears and mosquitoes, so relevant to this field site. Icy conditions, input being heard. Yeah, there's a lot going on. Varied skill levels, sense of worth, that's interesting. Long hours, definitely relevant sometimes. Lack of food diversity, don't you know it? I've eaten a lot of pilot bread in Alaska, which is like this dense biscuit. If you're not familiar with it, that's very flavorless. Okay, Western scientific culture versus indigenous and local community perspectives, helicopter science, sharing chores, ideally sharing chores. Cool, thank you for participating in that. Here I'm gonna walk you through some potential challenges I've identified here that have been relevant to past field experiences of mine. So here, it's obviously very difficult to leave, very difficult to report incidents without proper structures in place. We're physically and socially isolated, and we heard at / I said, and people have said, yeah, there are complex power dynamics. And in this remote environment, and research has shown this to be true across remote environments, increased vulnerability to bullying and harassment when you're in such an isolated place with such a small research team, and new tasks and higher stress levels. But there are other things that could impact safety as well. That could be challenges in the field. In this environment, there's increased vulnerability to identity-based exclusionary behaviors. It could be really demanding and physically strenuous work. I loved the shout out to long hours and perhaps bringing that into conversation so that you can be sustainable in your fieldwork. Increased exposure to unfamiliar hazards, and probably even more, as you all noted. So in order to make sure that this field team can be successful, not just in collecting the data that we want to collect, but also in making sure that people feel heard and are safe and ideally have fun, which can be a really awesome part of fieldwork, we need to think about the people parts of field safety, and we need to be proactive rather than reactive in doing that. Which is where the Advancing Field Safety program comes in, and I think can be a very useful tool for working with your team through the program to be proactive ahead of going to the field, to think about those people parts of field safety. So now I'm going to take you on an overview in a second of the Advancing Field Safety program. But before I do that, I'm going to note there's added impetus for thinking about this because National Science Foundation, NASA, NIH are rolling out requirements or have rolled out requirements for some solicitations that call for safe and inclusive fieldwork plans. Some of you may be familiar with the SAFE plan, which I have noted on this screen, and calls for the consideration of multiple different things that we'll be talking about today that the Advancing Field Safety program addresses. And yeah, so we'll actually get there in a second. We had this plan in mind as we were developing the course. But where did Advancing Field Safety start? So it formerly was called FieldSafe, which is why FieldSafe is in green. And it was born out of this graduate student in CIRES at CU Boulder, having spent some time associated with the National Outdoor Leadership School, or NOLS as it's known. And her partner is super involved in NOLS, very familiar with what they bring to their teams. For those of you who don't have context, NOLS builds leadership skills, often in backcountry environments, remote environments, with small cohorts of people, and they've done a lot of work to build communication structures and instill applied leadership skills into their cohorts. So Alice had that in mind, and then she was engaging in these fieldwork situations with CIRES and thought there is a lot of room here for us to have conversations proactively and have formalized training on talking about the people parts of field safety. So she and a small team launched an initial version of the course that I'll go over the content of in a second, in person at CIRES in Boulder, and in 2019 and 2020, and got excellent feedback from folks. Folks started applying it in the field. And then she and others partnered with the ADVANCEGeo Partnership to create a second version as things moved online and adapted the materials to the online learning environment in 2022 and 2023. I'm going to pause here and ask who is familiar with the ADVANCEGeo Partnership, with a show of hands for folks in the room. Okay, just a handful. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a really great resource. ADVANCEGeo Partnership has been working for 5+ years in building bystander intervention workshops to give people, geoscientists primarily, the tools to intervene in a scenario where things feel uncomfortable, and to learn how to be an active bystander and a helpful bystander if something is to go awry interpersonally. So they partnered to create this version 2 and brought this really well, not only researched program from ADVANCEGeo, but really well received program to create this version 2, and we piloted it. This is where I come in. We piloted it with Puller early career scientists through the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, and got even more great feedback, anecdotally speaking, but we also did research and evaluation on how it was received by the folks who took it. Okay, pausing. Other things that were happening in the background, Alice and others published an article in EOS calling for a culture change in the geosciences, calling for programs like these. And then the NSF released an updated version of the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, or PAPPG, PAPG, however you call it. And they had this section on calling for safe and inclusive working environments. So this was impetus then for creating this next, ideally more funded version of the Advancing Field Safety program, and that's where we come to today. Okay, so I've been talking about AFS, Advancing Field Safety, but what is it? We have created this massive open online course or training program that can be taken asynchronously. It's freely available online by anyone who wants to take it, and it walks through 7 different modules, which I'll get to in a second, building on the material that Alice and colleagues have initially put together. And alongside of that, it's paired with live debriefing sessions from the Advancing Field Safety team, where we take the tools that folks learn about in that online environment and we practice them in real time. And I'll go over that in a second. And it's also paired with a toolkit. I'm particularly excited about the toolkit, and I'll be showing you some resources from it later on, because this is, no matter whether or not you touch the training program, though I hope you do, this is just such a wonderful resource for anyone who's looking for examples of documents and conversations you might want to have ahead of the field. And it gives you a lot of thought-provoking questions to discuss with your team, guides, so we'll go over that in a second. So those 2 things together are underpinned also by research and evaluation, or effectiveness research. So we have this awesome team that's distributed across the US that are surveying folks who are taking the program to see, does this make a notable difference on field culture and field environment? And we're hoping that all of these things together ideally can lead towards a transformation of field research culture where people feel safe and like they can communicate well, and ideally lower some of those harassment numbers that we saw at the start of the presentation. Okay, so there's a lot here. I'm going to walk you through it module by module because it's really cool content. We have about 3 main themes of the program: creating a safe field environment, creating a safe team culture, and building an inclusive field environment. And so for these first 3 modules, these were the first 3: preparing for and evaluating hazards, communication and leadership, and codes of conduct. That's what Alice had initially launched the program with. So in this first module, the course walks through how to recognize hazards and risk, use decision-making tools, and how that can be different depending on what the decision is, really empowering folks in different positionalities to feel equipped going into the field. Creating communication and emergency plans. That's kind of the more classic field safety stuff that we often hear about. Communication and leadership focuses on identifying leadership roles and styles, discussing the importance of briefing and debriefing in the field. I want to pause here and ask, with a show of hands again, who knows what a briefing is? What does that mean? Or, yeah, who knows? Cool. Can someone, I'll repeat it for folks online, but can someone say what comes to mind for it? Yeah.
So it's just the plan for the day, basically.
Awesome. For folks online, it's like the plan for the day, or perhaps where you're going to fly, depending on what sort of campaign you're on. Yeah, here, that's awesome. And I think briefing can look like a whole bunch of different things, so I'm not meaning for it to be a trick question. But here we're hoping that with pre-field communication, you can have some sort of structure to say, yeah, this is what to anticipate for the day, and to set expectations. I've been in my fair share of field campaigns where I had no clue what was going to happen, and I was along for the ride, which wasn't great for like mental expectation setting. But then paired with a debrief, which is really easy to skip at the end of a really long day, speaking from experience and like wanting to curl up into my sleeping bag after being on a glacier all day. Debriefing is so important because it takes just a moment for your whole team to then check in on how did that go? Do we need to pivot for the next day? How's everyone feeling? Just like another check-in point to communicate what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve, that sort of thing. Okay, codes of conduct. I'm gonna take a note here, a pause here also, and say I've had some colleagues when I mention the phrase codes of conduct have like alarm bells go off, and to them what a code of conduct means is like legal jargon and a formal document that is tied up with university policy. That's not what we're creating. What we're suggesting you create is like a set of expectations and norms where everyone knows what's expected of them and what sort of environment they want to create ahead of going to the field. And we call for creating that sort of norms and expectations code of conduct document together as a whole team so that everyone, no matter if it's like an undergraduate research assistant to that like 20 years in the field PI has a say in like what sort of environment they want to build. Okay, we also have bystander intervention training, which I noted before. But in more detail, that's learning how to recognize and respond to exclusionary behaviors and how to intervene. So it's one thing to feel uncomfy and feel like something maybe wasn't great that happened, and it's another thing to like feel that and then feel empowered to respond. And so we really try to practice what that can look like in the program. Next, we have inclusive mentoring, so building inclusive communication skills and co-developing a mentoring plan. And this isn't just for a mentor to mentee, this is for a mentee to mentor wherever you are in that mentor-mentee spectrum. And then keeping diverse field teams safe, so identifying and mitigating risks to individuals with diverse identities in the field, especially relevant depending on your field context. And then cultural inclusivity. We focus on identifying and navigating cultural differences in the field. And this, international research came up, so this seems certainly relevant to some crews perhaps in this room, but this can also just be a difference in like the culture someone grew up in within the United States. Like the culture of rural Wisconsin farm life for me was likely very different to the cultural expectations of someone who grew up in inner city environment somewhere. Okay, so that next part, that was the course, the online course. And these debrief workshops, as I noted before, like really practices some parts of the course. And gives you frameworks for employing those. So the way this looks is having virtual live facilitated workshops to translate course content into action, focused on the code of conduct and decision-making part of the curriculum, and then also practicing that bystander intervention piece I noted before, with the other aspects of the curriculum kind of woven into scenarios as well. And then the toolkit that I noted I was especially excited for. So here we have examples and implementation guides for various aspects of the program. Every single module has a really well thought out AFS team created resources to pair with the content. And also we've pulled external resources that are really awesome into a toolkit format. So we have examples of incident response and reporting, field handbooks, mentorship agreements, and a lot more. I pulled out a couple of examples here. So this is, I already went over briefing and debriefing, but we have a document that has questions that you can employ in your briefing and debriefing, which is really a field-ready resource that you could have on hand. We also have a reminder of the 5 Ds of bystander intervention. These 5 Ds are guidance for like how you can intervene in a scenario with cool graphics and a reminder of what those are. And then an example of an outside resource is this Ouch and Educate tool. That is something we reference in the course, and then we explain how you can employ it, and then give examples of how that's relevant, how it can be employed, etc. And I'm going to take just a minute to walk you through. If you take nothing else from this course, I want you to take the ability to access the toolkit resources with you. So I'm going to play this. This is the ADVANCEing FieldSafety website. You can go to About the Toolkit. It goes over not only where you can access resources, but also if you have resources to contribute, we're always open and willing to add to our resource repository. Then we have all of the modules. We have a fun search tool, so if you're curious if there's something that pops up related to keywords you have in mind, you can see my internet was slow, so it'll take a second to load. And you'll see that example codes of conduct pop right up. So not only the code of conduct facilitation guide, which is what I'm going to now, but we have 4 to 5 external codes of conduct we've linked. And this was cool. It has a sort of script you could use for how you address a challenging conversation if a code of conduct violation comes up, or a norms violation comes up. This is an overview of that briefing document. I just walked through a couple. And you can see, and I encourage you to click around for yourself. We have tags so you can understand, is this something that the AFS team created? Is this an external resource? And yeah, really feel free to explore and let us know if you have extra stuff you'd like to highlight. I think I'm going to fast forward to one other part. No, I think we're good. Okay. So I mentioned also that this whole program is underpinned by effectiveness research, or research and evaluation. And what we're aiming to do with that is to measure the effects of the course on attitudes, knowledge, skills, and behavior, and then to see if folks perceived added inclusion and added safety during their field campaigns. And the way that we're structuring this is to survey people ahead of the folks who are involved in the research program ahead of each of the different components of the program. I'm going to make a note here that anyone is still able to participate in the research program right now. We have, as I noted, a really stellar research and evaluation team who could walk you through how engaging in that research could look. Folks who participate in the research get a $50 stipend for their time invested in taking the surveys. And you'd help us to see if this, from a research perspective is really helpful to folks. This is where you can go to learn more about the research program. At the giant QR code on the right, you can also find it really easily on the AFS website. But just noting again that we're thinking about the attitudes, skills, behaviors, and then also we're considering how does context affect how people perceive the AFS course to be helpful or not. Context can mean so many things, type of research, or what sort of cohort took the program. Did the whole cohort take the program? That sort of thing. And I already noted we're also looking to see if it enhanced folks' feelings of inclusion and safety. Okay, so from the AFS website, you can take the course. You can engage with the research opportunities, as I noted, access the toolkit, and tell us if there are things that you'd like added to it or you think would fit there. And then you can stay in touch with our team by subscribing to the AFS newsletter if you're interested. I just want to do another shout out to the multiple, because it's a collaborative grant, NSF awards that fund this program. And also kind of leave this rad graphic that my colleague Amy put together up here that calls out different scenarios related to hazards, microaggressions, and cultural exclusivity. And note that if you've ever experienced one of these scenarios, the AFS course provides provides learners with tools to address scenarios like these. So we'd love for you all to engage, and please ask me any questions for sure, but email fieldsafe@colorado.edu if you want to learn more as well. Fairly short presentation, but are there any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Mariama, for that really informative overview of the course. Quick reminder to those online, you can ask questions on Slido. That has moved to a tab right above your video screen rather than below it. Are there any questions from anyone in the room?
Hello. Oh, that's weird. One of the hazards I seem to come across in the field are people who are coming to the field for the first time, and they may be specially skilled in the one area of expertise that they're looking to apply, but then that's only one category of what they have to do in the field. So addressing some of the physical requirements of, well, you have to put up your instrument and put a fence around it. Do you know how to use a T-stake pounder? You know, some of the standards of actual making yourself susceptible to more hazards by having untrained hands.
Yeah, absolutely. That comes up all the time. And I experienced that in the field last year, where there was a really positive contributor to the team in some aspects, and then because they maybe was on a different page in other aspects and didn't know how to engage in the research we were doing. And something our team reflected on after that was that we could have done a better job at expectation setting, and then also checking in ahead of the field to say, do you know how to use a stake pounder? How, if you don't, like, let's make sure you have that skill ahead of going to the field. So I think that that's where the communication aspects of, that's really called out in the communication aspects of the AFS program, where not only should you be doing pre-start of day briefing, but ideally you're having team meetings ahead of the field campaign too. And I know it can be tempting to cut those things when you're time limited ahead of the field, but they are critical parts of making sure that people stay safe, that you don't have a physical hazard then on your hands because someone's improperly used a stake pounder or whatnot. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Any other questions?
Yeah, my question is more, how do you prepare for intercultural issues when you go out in the field? One example I had a long time ago was in Indonesia during Ramadan, and I noticed after some time all our Indonesian colleagues were suddenly disappeared. And they came back, and then they were gone again, not knowing, oh, it's Ramadan, to pray 5 times a day. Well, and so they left me alone. It didn't cause a problem, luckily. What was a little bit more challenging, during Ramadan, they can't eat during the day. That also means the local youth, they go around the village at 2 a.m. with trumpets and drums and all that, making noise. Wake up, yeah, it's time to eat. Which of course woke me up. So again, it didn't cause much of a challenge for me in this case, but I can easily see that this causes a lot of stress for people. How can you prepare for unexpected stuff like that if you don't know the local culture?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and comes up in international fieldwork all the time. What we recommend is that, one, folks do a lot of research on the local context that they're going to ahead of time, and that might not just mean seeing what you can find on Google, but like talking to your research partners about their needs and setting expectations about that ahead of time. Potentially also, although I know that this isn't always controllable, but avoiding holiday periods where that might impact work if it does significantly, or making sure that you have breaks. You have a structure because you've communicated the need ahead of time, that you have breaks for prayer during certain times of the day in that case, or for fasting, you create a plan with your partners who know their needs along with like cultural needs, and then perhaps as a team, you can determine what physical needs do you have, because you might need energy that might be lacking when you're fasting. So it's so cultural context dependent, but I think communication as best as possible. And I know sometimes that's hard if you don't have trust built or like a relationship built ahead of time. It might be hard to even, for someone to even know that might be a relevant thing to bring up. I would point you towards one of the resources in Module 7. It kind of walks through questions you could ask field partners about cultural considerations. But I'd say ahead of having those conversations, really investing in relationship building so that you have enough trust that you can rely on someone to communicate that need.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks. I might actually add, I had a different field campaign happening in Germany. I'm from Germany, so it's the cultural, that was all good. But all the participants, or a lot of the major participants, they came from all across the world. And I was working with people from, I don't know, the Caribbean, from Africa, from Indonesia, from Philippines, and God knows what. And there we didn't know who's coming. So that was a real adventure. But yeah, what you just said, I can support that. Yeah, building the relationship at the beginning, that was a big help in that case.
Yeah, something else that was just recommended by a pretty awesome early career researcher was that they said that they often, at least in these glacial environments I've worked on, we have things like during the summer fieldwork season like Jerpmas, which is like Christmas in July or whatever. Or, you might celebrate Christmas in December if you're in Antarctica at that time or what have you. I'm speaking to polar contexts. But they said so rarely are they asked if they have a holiday they want to celebrate. And I think having the conversation ahead of time also gives you the space to participate in a potentially really enriching cultural experience that also makes that special for a person who's missing a holiday, out of the context of their normal environment. So there's so much we can learn, like, by working across cultural contexts.
Yeah, but it's challenging.
Yeah,
Thanks,
but it is hard. Yeah. I see we have a question online.
Yeah, so we have a question from Lorena Medina Luna. It says, thank you for sharing these resources. Is there a train the trainer aspect of this program?
Yes, there will be. Please email fieldsafe@colorado.edu. We're trying to build capacity for the debrief team because we're a finite number of people across crazy time zones, which makes it really hard to cater to specific audiences. So yeah, definitely reach out.
Any other questions from the room?
Yeah, thanks for your presentation. So a couple questions related specifically to your program. So in the case of like our two labs that are sitting here, we have colleagues that participate in multiple field campaigns a year. I don't expect that you would think that these kinds of folks would take this course before every field campaign. I would assume like for the participants here, this would be something that folks could like take once and take a lot of learning from it and use the toolkit. Is that how you guys would kind of imagine like a group like us using this course?
I would say so. I think the caveat to that being that if you bring on new team members, it's so important for them to know what the shared expectations are and to give them a voice. And so maybe like every field team has its own context, but I'd probably recommend, and I think our team would recommend, like doing this, investing in this training all at once, and maybe revisiting it every once in a while as you onboard new folks and make sure they have the resources too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what we have uniquely within our labs is like the new participants that you're describing as well. And so in that case, this would be a great resource to share with people like Ben is mentioning too that haven't participated in the field or folks that are new to working in field campaigns as well versus some of the folks here that have participated in a lot. So I really like that option as well to give people even more learning outside of what we would be able to share with them. So
yeah, absolutely. I've been trying to pitch it as a sort of, we invest in wilderness first responder or wilderness first aid courses. I don't know if that's a thing that folks, I see some head nodding, which are the first time you take a woofer is like a week long, a woofa or woofer research is like a weekend. This takes 9 hours of asynchronous content that you can do at your own pace, and then 2 debrief sessions. So it's even shorter than that, and I think just as important for keeping people safe psychologically. Yeah, any other questions?
So I have a quick question. For those who might be writing a proposal to NASA or NSF and looking to include this to meet some of those PAPG requirements, do you have suggestions on your website about how to reference that or discuss it or overview it or?
Yeah, excellent question. I would say reach out to fieldsafe@colorado.edu. You can really easily write the program into your grant. For a debrief session for 20 people, so if you participate in research, there's not a cost to it because that's a part of the research. But for covering facilitators' time, it's like $2,000 for 20 to 24 people. So it's like a pretty small drop in a bucket on an NSF grant. And you can reach out to us to get a letter of support and write it in pretty easily.
Thanks. Any other pressing questions from the room? They are local, so easy to contact, easy to set up meetings. So if there's no other questions, thanks Mariama again for that overview.
Thank you.